Hello. Now that you've been introduced to the unit, we're going to start focusing on what skills you'll need in order to be successful with your summative assessments. You may remember that you're going to be graded on organizing, and our ATL skill is specifically about organizing information in a story structure. As we go through this video, you will be completing the responses in yellow, as I will be giving you some of the answers, and some of the answers you'll figure out on your own. Let's get started. Part 1 is approaches to learning, which is what ATL stands for, skill. And an ATL skill is a skill that we want to master. ATL skills are skills that you can use across multiple subjects in and out of the academic world. And our focus, as we mentioned up here, is organizing information in the story structure. So you'll write organizing right here. Now you may be wondering, why is it important to be able to identify, create, and or tell an organized story? And there are many reasons for this. First of all, it helps you to comprehend and communicate a story more clearly. It helps you to better enjoy reading or listening to a story. Next, colleges often ask you to write a story on the essay prompt for admission applications. Also, job interviews often include telling a story to demonstrate your experiences. Another reason this is an important skill is that many interesting jobs include communicating with employees or customers through storytelling. And last but not least, based on scientific studies, people will better remember you and what you communicated if you tell it in the form of a compelling, organized story. And remember, when we're talking about story, it can be fiction or nonfiction. The next step is to look at story structure elements. Part 2. There are 5 parts to a story. Typically, you have the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So let's look at those. The exposition has several parts to it. The exposition of a story sets the stage for what will happen. Expositions include the following. Here you will write the word setting, S-E-T-T-I-N-G. That means where and when a story takes place. Another important part of the exposition are the characters, and these are the people in the story. And of course you have major characters who are really important. Often there's one major character, but you can have more than one. And you have minor characters who are less important, but they're still involved with the plot. After that, you also have the basis of the conflict revealed. So you'll write conflict, C-O-N-F-L-I-C-T. A conflict is a serious disagreement, argument, or problem between two opposing forces. You might recall from earlier years that there's 2 types of conflicts. There's the internal conflict, which means it takes place inside the mind of a character. They may feel bad or good about something, or they are trying to make a decision. Second is an external conflict, which is a conflict between the character and some outside force, another character, nature, society, or fate. Once the setting, characters, and conflict are established, then you typically begin the next phase of the story structure, which is the rising action. The rising action of a story is the bulk of the plot. It's composed of a series of events that build on the conflict and increase the tension, sending the story racing to a dramatic climax. The climax of a story is the emotional high point of the story where the conflict gets resolved. So whatever the conflict or issue was that was established in the exposition, you are going through a series of events that happen before you find out how that is resolved. After that, you have the falling action, which is what the events that happen after the high point, which is the climax. And the resolution is the final outcome of the story. What are the main characters doing or feeling at the end of the story? It basically, the resolution wraps things up, except for in the case if there's maybe the story is part of a trilogy, but it sets you up for the next story in the trilogy. You might remember seeing this graphic organizer before, where when you think about a story that's a good story, you have your exposition is established early, you have your rising action, the conflict is resolved at the climax, then you have falling action and the resolution. Now we're going to do a little bit of practice with understanding the elements of a story. Part 3, practice identifying story structure elements. Again, it's how a story is organized. We're going to read the Aesop fable below and then write or copy and paste the parts of the story into the boxes next to the corresponding story element. So here is a very short Aesop's fable. We'll read it and then we will respond in the yellow based on what are the story elements. In the field one summer day, a grasshopper was hopping about, chirping and singing to its heart's content. An ant passed by, bearing along with great toil an ear of corn he was taking to the nest. "Why not come and chat with me?" said the grasshopper, "instead of toiling and moiling in that way?" "I'm helping to store up food for the winter," said the ant, "and recommend you do the same." "You are a fool to work so hard on this beautiful day. Why bother about winter?" said the grasshopper. "There is plenty of food this summer." But the ant went on its way and continued to toil. When the winter came, the grasshopper had no food and found himself dying of hunger. Meanwhile, it saw the ants were distributing every corn and grain from the stores they had collected in the summer. Then the grasshopper knew it was best to prepare for the days of necessity. Okay, so let's figure out the exposition. So we're going to go back up and reread and look for the setting. And when I come back up here and reread, I do see that I've got in the field one summer's day. And that's where the setting is the whole time. So I'm going to copy that and paste it, down here. And I've got my setting. Okay, now I need to figure out who the characters are. And I already know that the characters are the ant and the grasshopper. Now I need to figure out the conflict. And when I go back up, I need to analyze this because it's not super clear to me, but I'm looking at this conversation and it looks like the grasshopper thinks that the ant's a fool to be working so hard, and the ant thinks that's the right thing to do. So the conflict is who is, I'll say, right about working hard, the ant or the grasshopper? And I think about that because the grasshopper says that he's a fool. He's kind of making fun of the ant. Okay, so now we've got the rising action. And what we need to only put events that happen before we find out who is right. And as you know, the grasshopper is wrong and the ant is right. But let's just copy and paste some of the events that happened before. These are the rising actions. So here's the setting. I would say here's We'll just copy and paste this for now because it's such a short story. So I'm going to say that the grasshopper is hopping along and sees the ant working hard. And what's our next one? So they're seeing each other. Now we kind of have to build up explaining what the conflict is. So I think I'm going to copy and paste these two sentences because this is really explaining what the conflict is. And I'll come down here. This is my next rising action event. And let's see, this is all going to happen before the climax. And I think this is important too, these two. It's a very short story, so we're basically copying the story. If it was a long story, we would just summarize. So I'm going to put this here too as another rising action where the grasshopper says that the ant's a fool, but the ant keeps working hard. The next step is to find the climax. At that point, do we know that that grasshopper is wrong? And I would say this sentence here is saying that the grasshopper is dying of hunger because he did not store up the food. So that would be the climax. The falling action happens after the climax. So after he's dying of food, we know of hunger, I should say. It says, meanwhile, he saw that the ants were distributing every corn and grain from the stores they had collected that summer. So I'm going to take that one, and that will be a falling action. And the resolution, in this case, it says, what are the main characters doing or feeling? This story is this part of the story also includes the theme of the story or the lesson learned by the main character and the reader. And Aesop fables always are super clear about what the theme is. And so it was, then the grasshopper knew. This is what he was left with, and it was the theme of the story. And it was that, which this is a good theme for all of us. It is best to prepare for the days of necessity. So basically, don't procrastinate and get your work done. So now we've picked apart a story, we've organized it into the 5 story elements. For the last part of this, you'll do your reflection on this lesson. Be prepared to share your response with, or I should say responses with the class. And you need to answer this first question. What is the ATL skill focus for this lesson? You'll write that here. What is your current level of ability with this skill? There are 5 levels. You will highlight one of them. 1, I've never heard of this skill before, but I'm eager to learn it. 2, I have been taught this skill in the past, but there was a pandemic, so now I need a refresher. 3, I think I've learned this skill, but I need more practice to master it. 4, I feel confident in this skill, but I could always use more practice. And 5, I'm a Jedi master of this skill. Step aside, teacher. The last part of the reflection is, when was a time you used this skill in the past, and or when might you use this skill in the future? And if you finish early before other students in the class, there are 3 different videos that would be pretty interesting to watch. And you can work on those while you wait for everyone else. Get ready to talk to the class, especially with your responses to the reflection.